Now here's a neat find. Woodpecker has been at work. It's probably a pilly over there.
Well, welcome to another edition of Birding with Bob here from Anoka County Parks. I'm Martha Weaver here with Bob Holtz, who is one of our adult education naturalists and also an ornithologist, which means you are our resident bird expert. One of them.
One of them.
One of them.
Yeah.
And today we're talking about a species of bird that doesn't necessarily come up in everyday conversation, or you don't necessarily think you see it, because I think of robins and starlings and those I normally see in my backyard, but the vireo, have you heard of it? I had not heard of a vireo before.
Yeah. That's called getting an education.
That's right.
Yeah. Vireos are small birds, somewhat similar to warblers, but they're a little stockier body build. They have a thicker beak, which actually has a tiny hook at the end, but not easy to see. They tend to be very drab colored. That would help explain why you probably haven't heard of them, seen them, as opposed to warblers that are usually quite bright, at least in the breeding plumage. And in addition, they are not as active as warblers. Warblers tend to bounce around looking for food all the time. Vireos can sit in the same place and sing for quite a while. You know.
As we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, there's a red-eyed vireo singing right now.
How many vireos do we have? As many as we have warblers?
Not nearly as many. We got 30 or so species of warblers, but only 6 regularly seen vireos in the state.
Okay, we'll talk about the one that's been serenading us here.
That's the red-eyed vireo. It's a bird that has an olive greenish back, white underneath, a very distinct white line over the eye. And he does have a red eye.
Really? Okay.
But if you're looking up in a tree that's high up and it's in the shade, you're not going to notice that that's a red eye. But a closer view, little sunlight on him, and you'll see it's very distinctly, he has a red eye.
Does it inhibit his vision at all, or does he see better at night or anything like that, or is it
I
just
really
his marking?
don't know. It's probably just his markings. I really don't know if it's of any benefit to him at all. His song has a robin-like quality, but it's a repetition of phrases that are very similar. It goes on and on and on. It almost becomes monotonous. People tend to say it's a, here am I, where are you? Notice the first little phrase goes up at the end, the second little phrase goes down. And he just keeps repeating that over and over.
Huh. Talk about their nests a little bit.
They tend to build a small nest in a crotch of a tree, and what's unique to them is they tend to put a light-colored lichens or some other light material on the outside, and it helps camouflage the nest quite well.
Very neat.
The second and very common vireo is the warbling vireo. Again, not seen very often because it's this drab olive color, sort of whitish underneath, but it's not a nice clean white. And it's hard to see, and it tends to stay high in trees. But if you learn its song, then you'll be able to identify it, because it's got a long warbling song, very different from the red-eye song. It's a woodland bird, builds a cup nest, much like the red-eyed, although not identical. And
they're protective of that nest.
oh, protective is right. Even bigger birds might come in, and they tend to get after them right away and chase them out of the area. Yeah. And they eat, and most of the warblers eat insects, sometimes spiders, and some small fruits, you know. So
There's a yellow-throated vireo as well?
the yellow-throated vireo is a rather colorful vireo compared to most of them. Greenish olive on the back, very bright yellow throat and breast, and then a white belly, and 2 distinct white wing bars, the little lines of white on each wing. So that really helps them to be identified if you can see them.
Okay.
They sound a lot like the red-eyed vireo, but it's a little slower, pauses between the phrases, and the phrases are more raspy and burry sounding. So if you hear a yellow-throated vireo, it shouldn't take you long to say, Vireo. And then you listen a little more and you hear that raspy voice and you'll think yellow-throated vireo.
Now the male and the female team up pretty well on occasion, don't they?
That's unusual, but he starts the nest usually and she finishes it.
That's normal.
And you don't know what they're thinking, but it's like he's saying, well, let me help with this, and she comes along and says, hey, let somebody who knows how to do this finish the job. You know?
It's kind of like loading the dishwasher. Thanks for trying to help. I'll take care of it. Are they pretty common though? Are they common in Anoka County?
They're not uncommon, but they're not as common as the red-eyed and the warbling vireos, but they do nest here too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're in Minnesota. We're in Anoka County, and there's a Philadelphia vireo.
Well, there's a couple vireos that pass through here. We do see them, but they don't nest here, and Philadelphia vireo is one of them. The key feature to me is they have a pale, very faint yellow underneath. It's not bright like in the yellow-throated vireo. Their song is a lot like the red-eyed again, but it's higher pitched and slower.
And where do they live? Where do they like to?
They go
hang
away
out?
to northern Minnesota.
Oh,
If
okay.
you want to see where they're nesting, you're going to have to go up to the very northern part of the state.
Okay.
And the other vireo like it that does not nest here is a blue-headed vireo. It's got a bluish-gray back.
And when you say they don't nest here, you're talking about Minnesota. Or
Not our metro area.
Okay, not in the metro.
They nest way up in the
Way up
northern
north.
part too. Yeah. And
Is that the blue-headed?
yes, the blue-headed. Besides that, they have a very distinct white eye ring. It just sticks out so much. If you know it's vireo from its shape and stuff, you can't mistake it for any of the other vireos. Yeah. And
There's one more?
one more. That's a Bell's vireo. Compared to other vireos, they're a little bit smaller. They're, again, rather drab colored.
Poor
They
vireo.
have an eye ring, but it's rather faint. They've got wing bars, but they're very pale and faint. And they sing quite differently too. So there's not a lot that jumps out right away that says vireo to you compared to the others. Its songs are short and rather harsh notes. They're not a long warbling song, not this repetition kind of thing either.
So I'm not completely out in the cold that I hadn't heard of them before, because they tend to be a little bit more shy, a little harder to spot.
They're drab. They're often high in trees. They tend to stay in trees and brush. They don't sit out on a fence post any place for you to sing. So if people are interested in learning about them, you should keep in mind, if you see them, they're not really that hard to identify. But it's the finding them to get a good look that's difficult. So it's more important with them than a number of groups of birds to learn their songs. And if you go to any bird store, they'll sell you a CD and you can practice listening to those and getting an idea what it is that you're hearing out there in nature.
Yeah, because from what we've heard today, it's absolutely delightful.
Yes, and they are, and I kind of challenge people, go out there, see how many of the vireos you can find this year. They are around, but the two who don't nest here are pretty well gone through already. So you have mainly red-eyed, warbling, and yellow-throated to be listening for in Anoka County. And I should have mentioned with the bells, they don't nest except in, as far as Minnesota, is in the southern part. And sometimes they nest in Anoka County.
Okay.
So that's not a common one. So those other three that I mentioned, those would be the ones to look for.
Oh, well, great. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us, Bob.
My pleasure.
It's always a pleasure,
Yeah.
Lauren, and it is an educational experience every day.
Good.
Thank you, sir. Bob Holtz, our adult education naturalist and ornithologist. I'm Martha Weaver. Thanks for watching Birding with Bob.